Hi, thanks for tuning in to this APS Flash Talk on trust and trust funds. My name's Holly, and I'm a graduate student at the University of British Columbia. So trust is really important for us to be able to interact with strangers. Let's take going to do some work in a coffee shop for an example. Trust is what allows you to ask a stranger to watch your laptop while you go to the washroom. And in fact, it's also trust that allows you to drink coffee made by a stranger, and that allowed you to get into an Uber driven by a stranger to get to that coffee shop in the first place. So without trust, none of these small interactions that make up a regular day, or at least that used to before COVID, would really be possible. Meaning that you'd miss out on the ability to do some work in this coffee shop, and these strangers would all be out of a job. But of course, we can't just blindly trust everyone. If you choose to trust the wrong person, your laptop could get stolen, your coffee could be made with almond milk and trigger your allergies, or the cab driver could kidnap you, or vice versa. So given these risks, it's actually kind of surprising that we trust strangers at all, but we do all the time. So how do people choose which strangers to trust? We think it's going to depend on how people weigh the answers to two questions. So first, is this the kind of person who would honor my trust? And second, is this person in a situation that would tempt them to betray my trust? Looking at social class, that is someone's education, income, and job, gives us an opportunity to figure out how people weigh these questions, because social class is associated with a whole host of stereotypes and perceptions that might affect how you answer these two questions. Also, social class is the focus of most of my research, so that's another reason why I'm looking at it here today. So if we care most about who's the kind of person who would honor our trust, we might want to think about who's a good moral person and who's not. And social class stereotypes are really likely to influence how we answer this question. People often stereotype upper class people as being cold and evil. So you could think of Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter, right? He grew up with old money, his whole family is sinister, evil, Slytherin, you know. In contrast, we tend to associate low or middle social class with higher warmth and morality. So if you think about Ron Weasley in Harry Potter, for example, he's a friendly, loyal guy. His family makes do with what they have. And we find this pattern in our data as well. So if we ask people what they think of someone who's upper class versus someone who's lower class, they tend to rate the lower class person as more moral. And of course, it would make sense if you think someone who's very moral is more likely to honor your trust, less likely to betray you. So for example, you might think Malfoy's the type who wouldn't really care about you, right? So if you ask him to watch your laptop while you go to the bathroom, he might just walk away and leave your laptop sitting there unguarded. Whereas Ron seems like a nice, honest guy who'd probably watch it pretty carefully. So in other words, this research on stereotypes suggests that if we focus on this first question, people will be more likely to trust lower class people than upper class people, because they see them as more moral and therefore more likely to honor their trust, less likely to betray it. But we might also consider who's in a situation that might tempt them to betray us. So since people know that upper class folks have more resources, they might expect them to be better able to honor and repay their trust, whereas they might expect lower class people to be in need or desperate and therefore more tempted to betray them. So for example, you might think, look, Draco lives in this giant mansion. He has no reason at all to steal your laptop. He's probably got a whole room of laptops. Whereas Ron, who lives in this ramshackle house called the Burrow, might be more desperate or in need. So there might be a bigger temptation there. So in other words, this reasoning suggests that if we focus on the second question, people will be more likely to trust upper class people because they think lower class people tend to be in situations that could tempt them to betray our trust. So to test these hypotheses, we ran 4 pre-registered studies using the trust game. In this economic game, the truster starts with some amount of resources, so let's say $10, and then the trustee starts with nothing. And they can decide to give any amount of their resources to the trustee. After they do that, the money gets tripled. So if you give all $10 to the trustee actually gets $30. And then the trustee can decide to return any amount of that $30 back to the truster. So if you really trust your partner, you should give them the whole $10 because they'll get $30, they'll probably split it evenly with you, so you'll both end up richer than when you started. But if you don't trust them, you shouldn't really give them anything because they can just keep whatever you give them. So in all of our studies, participants are always the truster, and then they play with 2 different bogus trustees, one who's lower class and one who's upper class. So the studies are all within subjects. In study 1, we had undergrads come into the lab, and first they fill out a profile about themselves. Then they read profiles that are supposedly from people in the cubicles next to them who they'd be playing the game with. And these profiles had some neutral information as filler, and then a couple hints of the target's social class. So for example, in one of these hints, the lower class person says their dad works in construction, mom works at a daycare, whereas the upper class target said their dad was a software engineer, mom's a corporate lawyer. As another hint, the lower class target said they couldn't really go anywhere over the winter break since they had to work, so they just hung out with their cousins. On the other hand, the upper class target also stayed with their cousins, but this time at their cousin's vacation home in Italy. And then we included a third control target, where we didn't provide any social class information. So once participants finished reading those profiles, they learned about the trust game, and there we used the same instructions I told you about earlier. But in this case, participants learned they'd be playing for raffle tickets, and the raffle is for a $100 Amazon gift card. So the more tickets you get, the higher your chances of winning the gift card. The truster starts with 10 raffle tickets, and the trustee starts with none. And to see who participants trust, we compare how many tickets they give the lower class target, upper class target, and the control target. So that's what I'm showing you here on the y-axis, the number of tickets transferred to each partner. So first, people give a little over 4 tickets on average to the control target. And that's really similar to the upper class target. So people trust control pretty much equally to the upper class target. And then here's the comparison that we're especially interested in, the lower class target. And we can see participants trust the lower class target more than both the control and the upper class target. So it looks like that's driven by increased trust for lower class people, more so than decreased trust for upper class people, because this upper and control target look pretty similar. And then in this study, we also looked for effects of and interactions with participant social class. We didn't find any here or in any of the other studies. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. So in summary, it looks like people might be more likely to trust Ron than Draco. Looks like people are trusting the person they think is a good person over the one who might be more tempted to betray them. In study 2, we wanted to replicate this pattern in another pre-registered study. So we kept everything here the same as in study 1. So again, they played the trust game for raffle tickets. But we also wanted to see if these effects would extend to a new economic game, the prisoner's dilemma. I think this game also involves trust, right? Because part of my decision about whether to cooperate comes from whether or not I think I can trust you to cooperate. So cooperating is only a good idea for me if I think that you're also going to cooperate. If I'm the only sucker who cooperates, then I can get the worst possible outcome. So first, looking at the trust game results, we found the same effects as study 1, with people trusting the lower class over the upper class person. And in this study, we didn't include a control target. And when we turn to the prisoner's dilemma game, we see a similar pattern. So people are cooperating more with the lower class target than the upper class target. So across both these different measures, it seems like people trust lower class people more than upper class ones. But these studies have some important limitations. So first, the social class manipulation used these profiles, which could be confounded with variables other than social class. So maybe people, for example, just thought that this upper class guy is kind of a jerk for showing off his family's wealth. Second, the targets were students at university. And that could mean that people had some unique views of this target that might not apply to other lower class people in general, right? So maybe they didn't think that the lower class target was that low status since they were in university, or maybe they had some kind of special respect for them for trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and increase their status. Last, these studies all involved exchanging a monetary resource, tickets for an Amazon gift card raffle. So people might have just wanted to be generous to help out that lower class person without actually trusting them. I think this concern is already somewhat mitigated by the prisoner's dilemma game because there we're not directly giving resources to the partner, but still we wanted to address it some more. So we designed study 3 to address the first 2 concerns and study 4 to address the third. So in study 3, we recruited UK adults from Prolific Academic. So in the study, we're no longer using undergrads. And these participants believe they're interacting with other targets on Prolific, so the targets are also not undergrads. And instead of using those profiles from the other studies, here we just manipulated really straightforward information that's purely about social class, such as their income. And as in study 1, we also included a control target where we didn't provide any information about their social class. And in this study, we just played the game with money instead of raffle tickets. So the truster starts with 50 pence, the trustee started with nothing. And despite all these changes to the procedure, we find the exact same pattern. So people are trusting the lower class target more than both the control and upper class target, and those two look very similar to each other. So it's really people do trust the lower class target, not so much that they distrust the upper class target. So it looks like these first two limitations don't explain our results. So even when we use a more direct manipulation of social class, and even when we don't study university students, we find the same pattern. So then in study 4, we turn to this last limitation about using monetary resources. So in this study, we followed similar procedures to study 1 and 2. So we used those profiles where we hinted at social class and we used university student participants. But the key difference here is we had them play with a new resource. So instead of money or something money adjacent like raffle tickets for a gift card, we had them play for time. So we told them that the truster started with 10 minutes, the trustee starts with no minutes, and then the amount of time they had left will be the number of minutes early that they get to leave the study, with a maximum of 30 minutes. And we told them any time they spent staying in the lab for that 30 minutes, we'll be doing really boring, repetitive questionnaires. And if they left early, they'd get just as much course credit as the people who stayed the whole time. So all our participants have a great reason to want to leave the lab early. So in this study, we don't have to worry that participants are just trying to be nice and help out the person who lacks money by giving them money. And again, we find the same pattern. So people are trusting the lower class target more with their time compared to the upper class target. So it looks like this last point can't explain our results either. So the effect isn't specific to money, but also emerges with other resources like time. So it seems like people did tend to trust the lower class person more, and the reason we suggested for this is that people believe the lower class target is more moral, is more likely to be the kind of person who would honor their trust, and is therefore more likely to actually honor their trust. And then those perceptions lead people to place more trust in this person. And we wanted to test whether this actually does help explain the effect of social class on trust. Our individual studies aren't powered to detect mediation effects, so we just pooled the data across all our studies to look at this pattern. And the serial mediation model using all the data from our studies does support this account. So participants view the upper class target as less warm and moral than the lower class target. Seeing a target as warm and moral predicts expecting them to honor your trust by returning more to you. And we measure this just by asking, okay, if you give this person all 10 tickets, so they had 30, how many tickets do you think they would give back to you? And this in turn predicted increased trust. And this overall indirect effect is significant. Something that's especially interesting is that if we take out the key piece of our mechanism, so the stereotypes about morality, about who would want to honor our trust, what we have left is the other piece of the puzzle. So holding morality constant, people do think that the higher class target is going to be able to give them back more money. And then this indirect effect is significant in the opposite direction. So if there was no difference in how moral people thought the targets were, people might have trusted the upper class target more, because that person has less temptation to betray us, right? They're more willing, more able to give us back more money. So in sum, it seems that when we're deciding to trust a stranger, we might take their social class into consideration when making that decision. So the negative stereotypes that we hold about upper class people's morality seem to really undermine our trust in them, even though we know they're probably less tempted to betray us. So it really seems like people weigh information about what kind of person they're dealing with over information about the situation that people find themselves in when deciding who to trust. So with that, I want to thank my collaborators, Kristen Lauren and Tony Schmader, my lab and my amazing research assistants, and you all for listening. So I would love to hear if you have any more questions or want to talk more about this research, please feel free to contact me. My email is right there. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.